Hi guys, I am in my home office and it feels weird to be talking to my phone instead of you, but I wanted to let you guys know that I miss you all and I'm here to help you in any way that you need help. Please let me know. And I thought that since we're starting a book study, it would be helpful if I read parts of the book to you. In the past, that has worked well, and so I wanted to make that available. Okay, so I have the PDF version on my iPad, just like I sent to you guys, and I'm going to start by reading chapter 1 and chapter 2 because that's the assignment for this week. Now, before we get into it, Maya Angelou is a really, really powerful author, and I Know Why the Caged Bird Sings is something that won a bunch of awards and brought a lot of attention to some of the discrepancies against women and Black women and the Black community. So I want you to think about that as you move forward. There's actually a movie about it, so don't watch the movie before you read the book because I will know the difference. But it's another way of looking at it, okay? So we're going to start with chapter 1. It's called Growing Up Black. What you looking at me for? I didn't come to stay. I hadn't forgotten the next line, but I couldn't make myself remember it. Other things were more important. Whether I could remember the rest of the poem or not didn't matter. The truth of the statement was like the wet handkerchief crushed in my fist. The sooner they accepted it, the quicker I could let my hands open and the air would cool them. What you looking at me for? The children's section at the Colored Methodist Episcopal Church was laughing at my well-known forgetfulness. The dress I wore was light purple, and I watched Mama make it, putting fancy stitches on the waist. I knew that when I put it on, I'd look like the sweet little white girls who were everyone's dream of what was right in the world. Hanging softly over the black Singer sewing machine, it looked like magic. When people saw me wearing it, they were going to run up to me and say, "Marguerite!" Sometimes it was, "Dear Marguerite." "Forgive us, please, we didn't know who you were." And I would answer generously, "No, you couldn't have known. Of course I forgive you." Just thinking about it made me feel heavenly for days. But Easter's early morning sun had shown the dress to be a plain, ugly one, made from a white woman's faded purple throwaway. It was long like an old lady's dress, but it didn't hide my legs. The faded color made my skin look dirty like mud, and everyone in church was looking at my thin legs. Wouldn't they be surprised one day if I woke up out of my black, ugly dream and my real hair, which was long and blonde, would take the place of the kinky mass that Mama wouldn't let me straighten? When they saw my light blue eyes, they would understand why I had never picked up a Southern accent or spoken the language like they did, and why I had to be forced to eat pig's tails, because I was really white, and a cruel magician had turned me into a too big Negro girl with kinky black hair, broad feet, and a space between her teeth that would hold a pencil. "What you looking at?" The minister's wife leaned toward me, her long yellow face full of sorry. I held up 2 fingers close to my chest, which meant that I had to go to the toilet, and walked quietly toward the back of the church. My head was up and my eyes were open, but I didn't see anything. Before I reached the door, the sting was burning down my legs and into the Sunday socks. I tried to hold it, to squeeze it back, to keep it from spreading, but when I reached the church porch, I knew I'd have to let it go. If I didn't, I would probably run right back up to my head, and my poor head would burst, and all the brains and the spit and tongue and eyes would roll all over the place. So I ran down into the yard and let it go. I ran, peeing and crying, not toward the toilet out back, but to our house. I'd get a whooping for it, and that nasty children would have a reason to laugh at me. I laughed anyway, partly for the sweet release. The greater joy came from not only being set free from the silly church, but from the knowledge that I wouldn't die from a burst head. If growing up is painful for the Southern black girl, being aware of her difference is worse. It is an unnecessary insult. So what we're seeing here is our protagonist, or the narrator, starts the story by talking about how bad she feels in church. She realizes people are staring at her. This isn't unusual. People do stare at her because she's black, and she doesn't feel like she fits in. And on top of that, she's got to go to the bathroom really bad. And she's trying to hold it, and she's dancing around, but she can't hold it. And by the time she runs out of the church, she runs out and she has wet herself. So there's a lot going on. She's embarrassed because she's black. She's embarrassed because of her figure. She's embarrassed because her clothes are hand-me-downs and old. And now she's embarrassed because she's beat her pants. So chapter 2 is called The Store. When I was 3 and Bailey 4, we had arrived in the dusty little town wearing notes on our wrists which stated, "To whom it may concern," that we were Marguerite and Bailey Johnson Jr. from Long Beach, California, on our way to Stamps, Arkansas, to Mrs. Annie Henderson. Our parents had decided to put an end to their disastrous marriage, and Father shipped us home to his mother. The conductor of the train had been asked to take care of us, and our tickets were pinned to my brother's inside coat pocket. I don't remember much of the trip, but after we reached the segregated southern part of the journey, things must have improved. Negro passengers, who always traveled with full lunch boxes, felt sorry for the poor little motherless darlings and gave us lots of cold fried chicken and potato salad. The town reacted to us as its residents had reacted to all things new before our arrival. It regarded us for a while without curiosity, but cautiously, and after we were seen to be harmless and children, it closed in around us, as a real mother welcomes a stranger's child, warmly but not affectionately. We lived with our grandmother and uncle in the back of the store. It was always spoken of with a capital S, which she had owned for around 25 years. Early in the century, Mama, who we soon stopped calling her grandmother, sold lunches to laborers in the 2 factories and Stamps. Her delicious meat pies and cool lemonade made her business a success. At first she went to the factories, later she set up a stand between them and supplied the workers' needs for a few years. Then she had the store built in the heart of the Negro area. Their customers could find basic foods, a good variety of colored thread, pig food, corn for chickens, coal oil for lamps, light bulbs for the wealthy, shoestrings, balloons, and flower seeds. Anything not visible could be ordered. When Bailey was 6 and I a year younger, we would repeat the multiplication tables extraordinarily quickly. Uncle Willie used to sit like a huge black Z. He had been crippled as a child, and listened to us, his face pulled down on the left side, and his left hand was only a little bigger than Bailey's. Mama related countless times, and without any show of emotion, how Uncle Willie had been dropped when he was 3 years old by a woman who was taking care of him. She seemed to hold no anger against the babysitter, nor for her God who allowed the accident. She felt it necessary to explain over and over again to those who knew the story by heart that he wasn't born that way. In our society, where 2-legged, 2-arm-strong black men were able at best to earn enough for only the necessities of life, Uncle Willie was the subject of jokes of the underemployed and underpaid. He was proud and sensitive, so he couldn't pretend that he wasn't crippled, nor could he pretend that people were not disgusted by his body. Only once, in all the years of trying not to watch him, I saw him pretend to himself and others that he wasn't crippled. Coming home from school one day, I saw a dark car in our front yard. I rushed in and found a strange man and woman drinking Dr. Pepper in the cool of the store. I sensed a wrongness around me. I knew it couldn't be the strangers. When I looked at Uncle Willie, I knew what was happening. He was standing erect behind the counter, not leaning forward or resting on the small shelf that had been built for him. His eyes seemed to hold me with a mixture of threats and appeal. I dutifully greeted the strangers, and my eyes wandered around looking for his walking stick. It was nowhere to be seen. He said, This, my niece. She's just come from school. You know how children are these days. They play all day at school and can't wait to get home and play some more." The people smiled, very friendly. He added, "Go on and play, sister." The lady laughed and said, "Well, you know, Mr. Johnson, they say you're only a child once. Have you any children of your own?" Before I left, I saw him lean back on the shelves of chewing tobacco. "No, ma'am. No children and no wife." He tried to laugh. "I have an old mother and my brother's two children I look after." I didn't mind him using us to make himself look good. In fact, I wouldn't have pretended it to be his daughter if he wanted me to. Not only did I not feel any loyalty to my own father, I figured that I had been Uncle Willie's child. I would have received much better treatment. The couple left after a few minutes, and Uncle Willie made his way between the shelves and the counter, hand over hand, from the back of the store. I watched him move awkwardly from one side, bumping into the other until he reached the coal oil tank. He put his hand behind it and took his walking stick in his strong fist and shifted his weight on the wooden support. He thought he had succeeded in his pretense. I'll never know why it was important to him that a couple would take a picture of a whole Mr. Johnson home with them. He must have tired of being a cripple, tired of the high-topped shoes and the walking stick, his uncomfortable muscles and thick tongue, and the looks of pity he suffered. For one part of an afternoon, he wanted to be rid of them. I understood and felt closer to him in that moment than ever before or since. During these years in stamps, I met and fell in love with William Shakespeare. He was my first white love. Although I enjoyed and respected Kipling, Poe, Butler, Thackeray, and Henley, I saved my young and loyal love for Paul Laurence Dunbar, Langston Hughes, James Weldon Johnson, W.E.B. Du Bois, Leighton in Atlanta. But it was Shakespeare who said, "When in disgrace with fortune and men's eyes." It was a state which I felt myself most familiar. I accepted his whiteness by telling myself that he had been dead for so long he couldn't matter to anyone anymore. Bailey and I decided to memorize the scene from The Merchant of Venice, but we realized that Mama would question us about the author, and that we'd have to tell her that Shakespeare was white, and it wouldn't matter to her whether he was dead or not, so we chose The Creation by James Weldon Johnson instead. Weighing the half-pounds of flour and putting them dust-free into the thin paper sacks was a simple kind of adventure for me. I developed an eye for measuring how full a container of flour, sugar, or corn had to be pushed the scale indicator over to 8 ounces or 1 pound. When I was absolutely accurate, our appreciative customers used to praise me. "Sister Henderson sure got some smart grandchildren." If I made a mistake in the store's favor, the eagle-eyed woman would say, "Put some more in that sack, child. Don't you try to make your profit off of me." When I would quietly punish myself for every bad judgment, the fine was no silver-wrapped kisses, the sweet chocolate candy that I loved more than anything in the world except Bailey, and maybe canned pineapples. My love for them nearly drove me mad. I dreamt of the days when I would be grown and able to buy a whole carton for myself, alone. Although the sweet golden rings sat in their cans on our shelves all year, we only tasted them during Christmas. Mama used the juice to make almost black fruit cakes. Then I lined heavy iron pans with the pineapple rings for which upside down cakes. Bailey and I received 1 slice each, and I carried mine around for hours, picking off small pieces of the fruit until nothing was left except the perfume on my fingers. I'd like to think that my desire for pineapples was so special that I wouldn't allow myself to steal a can, which was possible, and eat it alone out in the garden. But I'm certain that I must have considered the possibility that others would notice the smell on my fingers and didn't dare to attempt it. Until I was 13 and left Arkansas forever, the store was my favorite place to be. Alone and empty in the mornings, it looked like an unopened present from a stranger. Opening the front doors was pulling the ribbon of an unexpected gift. The light would come in softly. We faced north, slowly moving over the shelves of canned fish, tobacco, thread. Whenever I walked into the store in the afternoon, I sensed that it was tired. Only I could hear the slow heartbeat of its job half done. But just before bedtime, after numerous people had walked in and out, had argued over their bills or joked about their neighbors or just dropped in to say hello, the promise of magic mornings returned to the store. Mama opened boxes of crackers and we sat around the meat block at the back of the store. I sliced onions and Bailey opened 2 or even 3 cans of fish. That was supper. In the evening, when we were alone like that, Uncle Willie didn't stutter or shake or give any indication that he had a problem. It seemed that the peace of the day's ending was an assurance that the understanding God had with children, Negroes, and the crippled was still good. Throwing handfuls of corn to the chickens and mixing leftover food and oily dish water for the pigs were among our evening chores. Bailey and I walked down the trails to the pig yard, and standing on the fence, we poured an unappealing mess down to our grateful pigs. Later Late one day, as we were feeding the pigs, I heard a horse in the front yard. It really should have been called a driveway, except that there was nothing to drive into, and ran to find out who was coming up on a Thursday evening. The used-to-be sheriff sat on his horse in such a way that his attitude was meant to show his authority and power over the even dumb animals. How much more authority he would have over Negroes, nothing needed to be said. From the side of the store, Bailey and I heard him say to Mama, "Annie, tell Willie he'd better stay out of sight tonight." The N-word is used here and I'm not going to say it, assaulted a white lady today. Some of the boys will be coming over here later. Even now I remember the sense of fear which filled my mouth with hot, dry air and made my body light. The boys, those cement face and eyes of hate that burned the clothes of you, if they saw you standing around on the main street downtown on Saturday, boys, it seemed that youth had never happened to them, boys. No men filled with the ugliness and rottenness of old hatreds. The used-to-be sheriff was confident that my uncle and every other black man who he heard of the Klan's planned ride would quickly go under their houses to hide with the chickens. Without waiting for Mama's thanks, he rode out of the yard and sure that things were as they should be, and that he was a gentle master, saving those deserving servants from the law of the land, which he supported. Immediately, Mama blew out the coal lamps. She had a quiet talk with Uncle Willie and called Bailey and me into the store. We were told to take the potatoes and onions out of their containers and knock out the dividing walls that kept them apart. Then, with a fearful slowness, Uncle bent down and to get into the empty space. It took forever before they lay down flat. And then we covered him with potatoes and onions, layers upon layers. Grandmother knelt, praying in the darkened store. It was fortunate that the boys didn't ride into our yard that evening and insist that Mama open the store. They would have surely found Uncle Willie and just as surely killed him. He cried the whole night as if he had, in fact, been guilty of some awful crime. So that takes us to the end of chapter 2. And chapter 2 really introduces us to some characters and the setting. And I want you to think about that as we move forward. Who is this narrator? We know she's a little girl. We know she lives with her grandmother and her uncle. But I really want you to pay attention to the things in the story that make it unique. One of them is obviously the use of racial slurs and inequalities between the races. So if you have questions, you know to reach out to me, email me, and we can talk about it, okay? Bye, guys.